Hello, can everyone hear me?
I heard you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay.
I am ready to get started whenever everyone else is, since it's 3 o'clock. I believe we have everyone here.
I think you're missing a judge, actually.
Oh, we are? Okay.
We are
Also,
missing-
just before the round
Yeah.
starts, I want to make sure it's okay with everybody if we do evidence exchange through the chat, since I'll be sending my case there and I'll just be uploading any other cards we need in that case. Does that work for everyone? Okay, great.
Give me about 2 minutes. I'm just gonna go quickly do something.
I'm really sorry about that. It booted me off the Zoom. So I'm back. Okay, so everything's good to go?
I think we're missing Fleming now.
Okay. I should ask, are there any questions for me as a judge or the other judges as judges? All righty.
I did have a quick question to ask my opponent. Will you be spreading at all?
I don't think I'll be going too fast. I think I will be speaking fast, so I mean, I don't plan on spreading, but if I do, then I will definitely send a speech doc.
All right, same here.
And if you could maybe make that evaluation before the speech, like that would be totally awesome. You know, if you think it's going to be a quick speech, pretty brisk, setting a speech doc before is awesome for that. But you do you.
Okay, I will be
Maybe.
sure to do that. Thank you.
I'll also just send the affirmative in the chat, if that's fine with everyone. One sec.
All right, well, I'll take this opportunity to say congratulations to both competitors. It's truly an accomplishment to make it to this round. I'm honored to be able to judge you, and I'm looking forward to a fantastic debate.
Thank you so much. We will try our best.
So I sent the app in editable Word link. If anyone has any trouble with accessing that, just let me know.
I'm sorry, it's supposed to be in the chat, the link?
Yeah, I sent it.
Oh,
in-
okay. All right. I don't know why I didn't see it.
No problem. Is everyone ready to start? Okay. All right, let me just set up my timer. 6 minutes. This is my 1AC constructive. Pull out my case. Okay. So if everyone is ready, my time starts now. I strongly affirm the resolution: the appropriation of outer space for private entities is unjust. Observation 1. There's a distinction between extraction, tourism, exploration, and appropriation. Branch 19 explains. Non-appropriation restricts parties from making sovereign claims over underlying land. Without violating non-appropriation, those regimes grant parties the right to extract resources from land they do not own, transfer that right, and limit wasteful use. Because the resolution states unjust, my value for today's ground is justice, defined as giving each their due. Barnett 98. Justice is abstract and requires clear legal precepts to guide conduct. Justice is extremely abstract in general. For justice to be brought bare effectively on individual decisions, specific legal precepts are needed to guide conduct. Thus, because the legal precepts that guide conduct in outer space are international law, the value criterion is consistency with international law. Prefer the value criterion for 3 additional reasons. First, competing theories. Justice means different things to different people, and even if we solve all of justice, we don't know how to follow it in our day-to-day conduct unless it's codified into the law. The only way for the negative framing to have any weight is to be considered under the affirmative framing, meaning the aft framework is a prerequisite. Second, tacit agreement. Citizens consent to being part of the government by using its services and paying your taxes, and everyone has worked as a majority to make this law. After hundreds of nations and states pass ratifying treaties, amendments, legislation which require the agreement of citizens, then only a law is codified in I-law. This brings weight to I-law from consensus stemming from the entire world. And third, I-law prescribes clear obligations, contrary to most frameworks. Rules in the law are clear and easy to follow. They create norms that are utilized to guide conduct and maximize utility. For example, you don't go to jail if you make a mistake on your taxes, since they can be confusing, but you are punished if you break the law. Contention 1. International law prohibits appropriation of outer space. Question 19. International law currently prohibits appropriation of outer space for private entities in 3 ways. There is currently general acceptance in international law that the principle prohibits individuals and private corporations from owning property in space. State practice, domestic legislation, and legal scholarship all support this conclusion. First, state practice. States act in accordance with the original understanding of the non-appropriation treaty insofar as they have not endorsed individuals' claims to property in space. Challenges to the principle of non-appropriation have been struck down. Current state practice supports the conclusion that appropriation of space property remains impermissible under the non-appropriation clause of the Outer Space Treaty. 2. Domestic legislation. The United States has ensured that its commitment to the non-appropriation treaty is codified in domestic law. Other countries have also recognized this limitation to private ownership of space in customary international law. In their explicit compliance with international law, states' outer space laws similarly reject private appropriation of outer space. 3. Legal scholarship. Legal scholars also accept the non-appropriation principle extends to private individuals. Articulations of this position tend to follow one of 3 lines of reasoning. First, Article 2 implicitly bans individual appropriation. 2. Even if Article 2 does not itself ban individual appropriation, the de facto outcome of the explicit bar in Article 2 against state appropriation of space will necessarily also preclude meaningful individual ownership. Or 3, regardless of the language in Article 2, customary international law itself precludes private appropriation of land or property in space. Kelly 04, preventing private entities from appropriating outer space is key to enforcing Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty. Appropriation of lunar and celestial property by national persons, corporations, and non-governmental entities is prohibited by Article 2 and 6 of the Outer Space Treaty for 3 reasons. First, non-governmental entities may act in outer space only with the authorization of states. If a government was to recognize the appropriation made by one of them, it would constitute national appropriation by any other means. Second, Article 6 of the Outer Space Treaty defines national to include non-governmental entities such as natural persons or corporations. And third, if private actors were allowed to appropriate lunar and celestial property, then they would allow states to circumvent their treaty obligations merely by delegating authority to act in otherwise unauthorized manners to non-state actors. Press 21. Failure to follow international law allows for unrestricted escalation and conflict over space. It is a geopolitical imperative to determine if any commercial activities and use of extraterrestrial resources are permitted. Commercial utilization of outer space's resources is intrinsically linked to the escalation of international competition over resources, which could threaten international peace and security. There are significant drawbacks to commercialization of space exploration. Geopolitical competition over extraterrestrial resources threatens world peace and security, and increasingly commercial outer space in which there are no set limits would functionally fail. So states would resort to military force to protect and secure private assets. The only remedy is expressly regulate commercial activities. Gallagher 15, space war causes nuclear war. Because the U.S. depends heavily on space for military superiority, adversaries will try to neutralize the U.S. advantages by attacking satellites. If any nation launched an attack on satellites, nuclear retaliation would be an irrational response, but powerful countries respond irrationally when attacked. Anti-satellite weapons could contribute to nuclear war. Deterrence failure would increase. Leaders become concerned that China or Russia were preparing for an anti-satellite attack. Pressure could build for a preemptive attack. Contention 2, equitable access to space for all. Subpoint A, common heritage principle. 406, rather than allowing for private appropriation of outer space, international law defines a common heritage approach derived from equitable access. Space laws come to reflect the common heritage principle. The rescue agreement suggests equitable benefits to all. Under the rescue agreement, responsibilities imparted to all parties. And where there's a benefit, where there's a duty, there's an implied benefit. If an astronaut is an envoy of all mankind, then his missions are on behalf of all mankind. The Moon Treaty has been read to define the common heritage principle to mean broad equitable benefits. 406, the common heritage principle in space is key to long-term success. Private competition is counterintuitive and counterproductive. The development of a common heritage principle was a bold step by international bodies. It was a gesture indicating that we should all equitably share the benefits of space. The challenges of space are already as numerous as the stars. It would be counterproductive to add more obstacles such as a competitive structure. Subpoint B, international cooperation. Faith 06, international cooperation solves better for innovation than private entities and outweighs in 2 additional ways. First, international cooperation saves money. International cooperation in space exploration has the potential to reduce a partner's cost by spreading the burden to other nations. As per partner cost decreases, per partner utility increases. 2, international cooperation generates diplomatic prestige. Most international civil space endeavors carries with it an element of diplomatic cachet and control. The participation of other nations in the program increases the diplomatic influence of participating nations and therefore the diplomatic utility derived from cooperation. Wolfram 86, international cooperation is key to peace and progress. Violating ILO perpetrates into conflicts and international stability, as a violator is subject to a series of tariffs, sanctions, and international punishments, causing instability among residents in the world. But international cooperation is not merely a moral obligation. Cooperation has become a legal obligation by the fact that it was founded upon the common interest of the international community. The objective of this principle was progress in the spheres of economics, science, and technology, and culture. U.S. Mission Note 8. In the past, international cooperation under space has created multiple successful inventions and programs. One example of this cooperation is the International Space Station, been a shining example of international cooperation for over 20 years. Another advance in international cooperation came with the Artemis Accords, a set of principles to guide space cooperation, which helps create a safe and transparent environment, which facilitates exploration and commercial activities for all of humanity to enjoy. Backstages, because of these reasons and many more, I strongly urge an affirmative ballot. I'm now open for crossfire.
Okay, great. Everyone ready for cross, judges? Great. Okay. In that case, time starts now. Let's start on your standards for your framework. Starting off, you argue competing theories. How exactly does ILAW codified like day-to-day conduct better than, say, utilitarianism?
Right, because the framework, so is that my first reason to prefer?
Yes.
Okay, so in my first reason to prefer, I'm talking about why the reason that ILAW is a prerequisite is because it's actually codified. Like, people are actually binded to follow it, and the reason it's important is additionally because consent, like people actually agree to following it, and then I also have clarity because it's easier to follow. So it's it's a prerequisite because of, well, my other 2 reasons to prefer also support it, but because something has to be codified in law to actually, have weight in the real world. Like, extend my Barnett 98 card, which talks about how justice is abstract and requires clear legal precepts to actually guide conduct.
Right. Okay. So you talk about day-to-day conduct specifically in your first standard, which is what I'm talking about here, right? How does, say, the OST, which just says you shouldn't appropriate space in general, claim anything or talked about anything about day-to-day conduct in terms of like actually reaching a value of justice better than utilitarianism?
So your question is, how does the OST lead, how does international law lead to justice?
No, I'm asking how that leads to the argument in your first standard, like how it's easier to follow, basically.
Okay, so on the framework, I'm going for international law. And the reason my argument still functions is because, well, first of all, the resolution asks us about space, right? And second of all, we need clear legal precepts in space to actually guide conduct, like regulation. And by taking away these clear legal precepts, we risk things like, private entities without regulations. Extend my Prez 21 card also talks about how without these regulations, without these clear legal codes, we plunge ourselves into space war and nuclear war.
Right. Okay. But why is that more specifically hard? Or why is that easier to follow in day-to-day conduct than, say, utilitarian or a consequentialist framing? Like, for example, you just want to minimize suffering. Why is that more difficult to follow?
Because it actually makes people people actually have to follow it.
What exactly do you mean?
So the argument I'm going for in so we're still talking about my first standard, correct?
Right.
Okay, so on the first standard, it's actually approved. Well, Barnett 98 also talks about this, but it's basically for it to actually bear effectively on individual decisions, right? Like it has to have specific legal precepts. Like if you just utilitarianism can't bear effectively on individual decision unless we actually have pre-written legal, I guess, conduct, and I guess that's what I'm going for in the standard. I don't really know any other way to explain it.
Okay, that's okay. That's Crossfire. I'll take 2 minutes of prep time. I might add onto it later, but starting 2 minutes now. Okay, so the order is going to be neg af. Let me just send the document in the chat, and whatever cards I read in, whatever cards like I get to reading in the rebuttal portion, I will also add to the bottom of that doc. Okay, so if everybody's ready for me to begin, I'll start time now. I negate the resolution resolved. The appropriation of outer space by private entities is unjust. As the central question of the resolution is whether or not an act is unjust, my value today is justice, defined simply and traditionally as fair treatment. My criterion is minimizing harm or negative utilitarianism. Contested pile 21. Human suffering makes a direct moral appeal for help, while there is no similar cause to increase the happiness of a man who is doing well anyway. Pain cannot be outweighed by pleasure, and especially not one man's pain by another man's pleasure. One should demand the least amount of avoidable suffering for all. Unavoidable suffering should be distributed as equally as possible. Happiness is something we want. A positive goal. Suffering is something we do not want. A negative goal. Negative utilitarianism fights dystopias rather than promoting utopias. Definition. Appropriation is defined in the context of the Outer Space Treaty as a claim of sovereignty by means of use or occupation or by any other means. This means that when a celestial body is appropriated, companies retain exclusive rights to it. Counterplan. Amend the OST to keep land acquisition by private companies illegal, but to allow private companies to appropriate orbitals. The OST was established in 1967 and does not fit our current needs, is irrelevant to guidance regarding day-to-day policies and actions. David 20. Current space law was developed for a different, more benign era and doesn't adequately address the emerging dynamics of space activities. The framework has gaps that an adversary could exploit in the gray zones in coming decades. In particular, commercial space operations provided convenient cover for states at which to creep around international space norms and sidestep established law. And with that, my sole contention is the Russia-Ukraine war. SpaceX has recently launched Starlink, a mega constellation consisting of thousands of satellites providing internet access globally, including to Ukraine. Simon Knight 22 says that Ukrainian forces rolled into the shattered streets of Irpin. The destruction had knocked out all 24 of the city's cell towers offline. Just 2 days later, with help from Elon Musk, the city was back online. The country has received more than 10,000 other devices since Russia invaded. The terminals have already become central to the country's response to the war, finding both civilian and military uses. And there are 2 key ways that Starlink satellites are helping Ukraine in the Russia-Ukraine war right now. Subpoint A is by strengthening Ukraine's military capabilities. After Russia had attacked most of Ukraine's crucial internet infrastructure, Ukraine can turn to Starlink internet connection as an alternative source for their weapons and drone accuracy. Silver 22. Starlink satellites are helping Ukrainian military drones destroy Russian tanks and army trucks. Drones specifically fitted with thermal cameras can detect Russian vehicles at night, equipped with intake grenades that are launched as their target. Drones that rely on Starlink data and connection are crucial to preventing Ukrainian casualties by providing an opportunity to prepare for and evacuate from an incoming Russian attack. Jinklin in 22. Our drones are our eyes, said one Ukrainian military officer. Soldiers and civilians use them to see what's in the next village or along the next kilometer of road. If Russian artillery is preparing to strike, we can shift civilians. It's a possibility to make a preemptive strike and save Ukrainian people. Subpoint B is the information war. Russia has attempted to dominate the information war by destroying Ukrainian internet infrastructure and spreading disinformation internet. internationally. Ukraine 22, after knocking out the internet service in Kherson, Ukraine, the goal was to make Russia's false propaganda and unconsistent source of information. Russian forces also wanted to show some signs of success in the conflict by creating people's conflicts in occupied territory. Right after communication was disabled, the enemy's media started to spread fake news. Fortunately, Starlink is strengthening Ukrainian international communications, magnifying global awareness and governmental aid. Vinket 22. Ukrainians have relied on the internet to stay connected with the outside world, to communicate with each other in the government, and to get messages from world leaders. Government officials have used a connection to appeal for help from billionaires, to speak with Congress and European governments, and to collect information on Russian troop movements. A government app has been repurposed to allow people to report the position of Russian tanks and soldiers so Ukrainian forces can find and destroy them. Zelensky has uploaded a steady stream of videos to his social media accounts, inspiring Ukrainians to fight back. Social media feeds everywhere are filled with stories of Ukrainian bravery, pushing people to demand their government send military aid to Ukraine and enact stricter sanctions on Russia. Absent all these benefits Starlink provides in Ukraine, a Russian victory would prove to be disastrous, followed by more war crimes and human rights violations. This 22, the price of failure, the true cost of Putin victory could be staggering. The past week furnished a grim list of the future that ways of Putin is able to continue to wage war with impunity, commit more heinous crimes, and nuclear and chemical blackmail. A human catastrophe loomed caused by war-related disruption to supplies, push millions into poverty, increase malnutrition, and reduce funding for education and healthcare. More than 5 million people have fled Ukraine in 2 months, and more will follow, exacerbating an international migration emergency. The broader negative political impact of the war, should it range on indefinitely, is almost incalculable. This instability could in turn spill over into a larger conflict by emboldening aggressors, leading to a cycle of continuous human rights violations. Tistel 22. In terms of democratic norms and human rights, the full or partial subjugation of Ukraine could spell disaster for the international rules-based order and a triumph for autocrats everywhere. What message would it send, for example, to China over Taiwan, or indeed Putin as a coercive vulnerable Baltic republics? Islamist terrorists who napperatively plot to exploit the threats for Ukraine distraction would relish such a victory for violence. In prospect is a second Cold War, accelerating nuclear arms race, unceasing cyber and information warfare, and endemic energy shortages, ensure the dawn of a new age of instability. And for all the injustices to innocent civilians, Starlink has helped prevent not only in Ukraine, but globally. I urge a negative ballot. And with that, let's go into the top of the opponent's case. As an overview, regardless of whether international law is a better criterion, if I can prove that the opponent doesn't actually prevent a violation of I law, then neither side has offense under this value, so you must default to my value and my value criterion. My counterplan takes out the entire case because the OST ought to be amended to allow for only the appropriation of orbital slots. This is really key because this counterplan solves back for all of the opponent's impacts while still serving as a net benefit by allowing Starlink to continue to provide internet access to Ukrainians. On the reasons to prefer human rights violations as a consequentialist impact. First, laws are built off of utilitarianism in the first place. Therefore, the best way to evaluate a just society is with utilitarianism in order to uphold the benefits of international law in the first place, essentially is a prerequisite there. Second, violating different laws has different effects. The same impact cannot be applied to all of them. Insofar as I can prove that violating the OST specifically via appropriation doesn't result in any specific injustice or serves a benefit to majority, my opponent has no offense under their value. And third, the inherent ambiguity of the OST makes it impossible to settle between a broader and stricter interpretation. Their framework is skewed because it leads you to believe that it's a black and white interpretation of appropriation, inherently violating the OST. But even the term appropriation itself is loosely defined. And because it's so vague, you can't look to its singularity and automatically claim that it's a violation, because most people today interpret the OST to be broader and allow for more activities in space. Again, as I read to you in the card under my counterplan, the OST is way too outdated and it doesn't account for all of these current new innovations and all of these new possibilities, such as space mining and these mega constellations. The writers of the OST did not predict these innovations, which is why it's crucial that there needs to be an amendment. On the framework standards, you can group the first and third standard. They're essentially talking about accessibility and making it easier to actually follow the values, but nothing is codified in the OST. Again, it is so ambiguous and confusing and open to interpretation. There's no guidance to achieving justice since nobody can agree on how to apply it in day-to-day conduct. It's simply not a true standard because even the United States Congress passed the Space Act of 2015, which kind of got around the OST by arguing that companies would still be able to mine outer space without violating the Outer Space Treaty, and that is just another interpretation of the Outer Space Treaty. A lot of scholars agree that mining, asteroids, and satellites don't constitute as appropriation in the first place. On the Outer Space Treaty, on the fact that it violates it. Tronchetti in 17 states that the text of Article 2 represents free exploration without the possibility of being appropriated, makes it clear that law allowing sovereignty rise over unknown lands does not apply to outer space. When Article 2 forbids appropriation by sovereignty, it does not mention private. Both natural appropriation and private are denied. Private entities are allowed to carry out activities, but must be authorized by the state. The prohibition of natural implies prohibition of private. Prohibition of appropriation of outer space is valid for both private and public entities. So that essentially means that all of the arguments that it applies only to public entities doesn't also apply to private entities. On their second contention, international cooperation doesn't really solve for any of the impacts on my case, as the government doesn't have enough funding from taxpayers, whereas private sector gets plenty of funding from investors. But even so, you can turn the argument to my side because New 21 states that innovative concepts such as reusable rocket stages have shifted the launch industry into integrating reusability into vehicle design. Proliferation of ride-sharing missions had decreased the cost of space launch. So that makes it more accurate, more accessible to the broader international world. And I am ready for cross.
All right. So next up is a 3-minute crossfire. All right, so 3-minute timer. Are all judges ready? And opponent?
Yep.
Okay. Also, wait, just before we start crossfire, the doc that you gave, it doesn't allow access.
Oh, it doesn't?
Yeah, that's why.
That's weird. Said anyone should have access. Does that one work?
Let me try. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
All right, this one. So 3 minutes, if everyone is ready. Time starts now. So your framework is negative utilitarianism, correct?
Yes.
Why is this different from normal util?
Negative utilitarianism, instead of increasing benefits for the majority of people, it prevents harm.
Okay, so if I can show that the affirmative will also prevent harm, I win under neg util. Is that how it works?
Yes, if you can prove that
All
there's
right. All right. Now onto your counter plan. So your counter plan is based off the idea, like, since the OST is outdated, we need to like change it, correct?
since it is outdated and since it is so ambiguous and so difficult to abide by.
Okay, so outdated, ambiguous, outdated and ambiguous.
Yes, essentially, yeah.
Okay, so those two. All right. And onto your Russia-Ukraine war. So do you have any other instances of Starlink actually helping, or is that only one? Like,
yeah, so not only in Ukraine, Starlink provides internet access globally. It is providing relatively cheap internet access to rural America, for example, and it is also providing internet access that is not restricted or banned by governments around the world.
okay, so you're saying that it's helping around the world, not just Starlink. Do you have any cards for that?
Yes, I do. I can send those to
All
you.
right. Yeah, sounds good. All right, and now let's go on to the affirmative side of the flow. So on my framework, just confirming. So wait, actually no. First, what's the counter plan like? What is the exact status of the counter plan in like text?
What do you mean by that?
Like, is it condo, uncondo, or dispo?
I'm sorry, I don't know what those mean.
Oh, sorry. Is it possible for you to kick the counter plan?
For me to kick the counter plan? Sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Also, onto the affirmative flow. So on my framework, you said that util ILOT is based off util, and then different effects, ambiguous and counter plan, right? Was there anything else that you said on my framework?
Against the framework specifically, well, I argue that it's not a violation of the Outer Space Treaty itself, but on your framework, I believe I I read an argument that said that the OST specifically does not cause any harm. So you can't argue that just because violation of I law is unjust, that violation of every single international law is going to have the same effects.
Okay, and did you attack Perez 21 or Gallagher 15, my impact cards? In the speech itself.
Did I sorry, what are you asking?
Did you attack my impact cards in the speech?
Your impact card's about a space war, right?
Yes.
No,
I don't
think I
And did you respond to my first subpoint?
Which was
Common heritage.
Common heritage. Yes, I did.
Am I allowed to ask what it was, or is time?
That's time, but I put all my responses in the doc anyway.
All right. So next up, I have a 4-minute affirmative rebuttal. In this speech, so I have about 5 minutes of total prep time. So I'd like to use 4 minutes and 20 seconds. Are judges fine with that? All right. Okay. So my time begins now. So that's going to be the end of my prep time. Let me just cards about Starlink. Okay. All right. And then I have about 40 seconds left of my prep time. So 40 seconds off. Affirmative. I just put that in the chat. I think I will be going fast in this speech since I have a lot to cover. So I'll share the document in the chat. Is everyone fine with, again, like as I gave before, just a Word link? Yes. Okay. Sounds good. Let me just set. I'll put that. Okay, and in this 1AR, I have a lot of things that I probably won't read because there's a lot to cover in time. But I will try to get through everything. Just if you see me skip a card, just pay attention to the speech. All right. So I have shared the link in the chat.
Yeah, just signpost, please.
Yeah. All right. So before I start my speech, then I'll just give a quick off-time roadmap. First, I'll be addressing the framework. Then I'll be going into the counter plan, and then the negative DA, and then I'll be defending the affirmative case. But there may be some extensions made like across both of the cases for responses. Okay, so is everyone ready? Okay, is anyone not ready? Okay. All right, so my time, 4 minutes, starts. Now, first we're going to go on to the framework of negative use. So first, my opponent never told you how to weigh between the different types of sufferings, psychological or physical, and because of this, their framework is incomplete. Additionally, even if you don't buy this, just international law is key to achieving negative use as a prerequisite. Extend Barnett 98, no, Wolfram 86 says it's key to peace, cooperation, and prosperity. Meaning, even if UTIL is correct, we still need to follow international law. And third, extend the second reason prefer of law that goes drop. People actually consent to following it, and that's the only way to access the real world impact on the counter plan. First, on the argument that is outdated, it's still binding. There are no other robust and comprehensive treaties that guide us. By ignoring the OSC, we plunge face into a free-for-all that becomes anyone's game. Regulations are key. And to Person 19, under legal scholarship, domestic legislation, and state practice, the concept of appropriation being banned and unjust is still relevant in practice today, meaning the claim in the OSC is important, still stands because people are still consenting to following it. And third, it will be almost impossible to actually change, it's not in the doc, but it'll be impossible to actually change this law because it takes so much time to actually make the treaty and all these things. Additionally, on to the ambiguity point. First, the OSC has never been broken. The ambiguity has only led to practical challenges, always the treaty in mind that made no real impact. Stewart 17, the OSC has practical challenges, been always with parts of the treaty in mind, never to undermine it. The treaty has never been violated. Practical challenges have been made with parts of the treaty in mind, rather than seeking to undermine it. 2, ambiguity is a false claim to justify possible loopholes. People claim it's ambiguous and try to justify appropriation, but this is false as it clearly states that states cannot claim property, and this prevents any recognition of other claims. 3, following law with the OSC is much clearer than other philosophies. It provides robust and extensive routes of value action, extend my third reason to refer. Therefore, the warrants behind the CP do not stand as they are based on the premise that it's ambiguous and outdated, which was what my opponent said. Additionally, now on to their Ukraine D8. First, Starlink increases targets and escalates space war. Condon 3-3. Starlink has a high probability of being targeted cybersecurity experts. Similarly, satellite put users at risk. Given Russia's experience, if you can control the air user transmissions, become beacons for airstrikes. And if Russia feels it needs to, they will extend their war into space. 2, it can't solve. Morrison 3-2. May not be necessary. No easy task for army to cut a country off. Several companies throughout several mediums. Even harder to cut Ukraine, which face cyber attacks. And 3, launching tens of thousands of satellites into low Earth orbit significantly increases the risk of collisions and debris. David 21. The probability exists for catastrophic collisions and debris is expected to increase by 290%. With privatization, that would mean 72,000 failed satellites. As companies and government services launch more satellites, concerns are growing about the likelihood of a cascading series of orbital collisions that may curtail human access to space for hundreds of years. 4, Russia independently serves a space war over Starlink. Now, time frame for debris explosions could be within the week. Starlink angered Russia used to guide fire on Black Sea Fleet's flagship Moscow. It's saying Medvedev in order to destroy Starlink over Russian territory, military operations zone, and the Black Sea to ensure security. And 5, risk of hacking is higher than ever. Structural issues limit hacking improvements on stats. We cite Elon Musk warned Starlink terminals permanently unusable by Russian cyber attack. Risk being hacked. Visa terminals permanently unusable by Russian cyber attack. Satellite internet introduces clearly new vulnerabilities. Lack of encryption, key issue. Transmissions cover vast distance, subject to speed, light latency. Packet loss, impair encryption. Satellites limited in computing and cryptographic operation. Trades off functionality. Now, Judge, we're going to go on to the affirmative side of the flow. First, I talk about how the breaking the law won't result in injustice. A, breaking the law in itself is an immoral action. It carries the intention of incompliance and causing harm on a global scale, which is unjust action on the process, as well as the intent to prevent one from receiving what they're due. Two, breaking the law also has concrete harmful impacts. Extend the Press 21 card, which goes conceded, which explains how breaking the law regarding space will lead to escalation, eventually space war, and possibly nuclear war. So they say that the OST breaking it will lead to nothing bad, but then they don't even attack my impact cards, which talk about how breaking the OST will lead to international instability, and they completely concede this. Additionally, they talk about how Article 2 doesn't ban. Look to Kelly 04 in my case, where I give 3 warrants, but even if Article 2 doesn't explicitly ban private appropriation, appropriation is still prohibited. It because the de facto outcome of the explicit bar in Article 2 against state appropriation will also preclude meaningful individual ownership. And again, also on my second contention, extend the U.S. mission card that says that international actors have an economic benefit to work together and innovate. They conceded this. Thus, Judge, because of these reasons and many more, I strongly urge and affirm the bill. Thank you.
Just checking. Did you read everything that you sent in the doc?
No, I said beforehand that I did not read it. Would you like to know what I didn't read?
Yeah.
Okay. So on the Starlink, I only read until 5th. So after number 6, I didn't read that. And then on the case, I talk about I didn't read the 3rd reason on breaking the law. It doesn't result in injustice because it's negative. And then on my I did not read the Space Mining Act responses, and that's basically it. I'm pretty sure.
Okay, cool. So you did or didn't read the 6th response to Starlink?
I did read the first 5 responses to Starlink.
Okay, excluding the 6th. All right, cool.
Yeah.
I will take my remaining 2 minutes of prep time starting now.
I think you have 3 minutes of prep time since we have a total of 5.
Pausing prep. For the previous rounds, we only had 4 minutes. Judge, could you
Really?
confirm?
Oh, we had 5 for every single. Oh,
We've been doing 5 minutes in the rounds I've been in.
Oh.
So yeah, I had you as having more than 2 minutes as well.
Okay, I was.
Yeah, the official tournament invite says 5 minutes. That's what I've done every round. But I feel like we should go with what the invite says. I mean, is everyone cool with that?
Yeah, I had no idea. The previous rounds, the judges told me it was 4 minutes, so
No.
I guess it's
That's what it is. I can confirm that real quick. Let me do that. Or do you want to? I mean, it's the semis round. Do you want to ask Tab real quick? I mean, I feel like that's what they're there for. But
I mean, no, it's okay as long as we all agree on 5 minutes.
okay, so we're all in agreement. Show of hands. Oh, show of hands. Show of hands. 5 minutes. We're all good. Okay, looks good to me.
Great. Okay, 2 minutes 45 seconds starting now. The order is going to be neg F, weighing at the end. Sorry, framing really quickly at the top. And if I end up going too fast, then I will definitely send a speech doc after. All right, so if everyone's ready, I'll begin my time now. Starting off on the framing, international law cannot be used as a framework for this debate round because the Outer Space Treaty is impossible to follow, meaning it's not any easier for people to use it as a guide to achieve justice. The 2 points I read at the top of their 1AR just tells you the benefits of international law in general, but again, it is not specific to the Outer Space Treaty. That argument assumes that all international law is abandoned. Otherwise, you can still definitely prevent harm while violating the Outer Space Treaty simultaneously. But even if you agree that, that following international law is important, it is not the only thing to evaluate in this debate round, meaning my impacts should still be evaluated. Again, the reasons to uphold ILAW that the opponent mentions are all based on utilitarianism. They're all based on harm. It's not a morality argument. So they agree that we need to prevent harm, meaning that you should look on a bigger scope of a framework of utilitarianism. With that, let's go into my case. Starlink connection plays a key role in helping Ukraine win the Russia-Ukraine war, namely by improving their weapons and drone accuracy and by enabling international communications. Absent these benefits of internet connection during war times, Ukraine would have no means of sufficiently advancing their technology to defeat the Russians or reach out for governmental aid and increase global awareness on the atrocities that are happening right now. Think about it, without internet access, Ukraine would have no means of winning this war. A Russian victory would mean more war crimes and human rights violations in the country, which could spill over to a larger conflict by emboldening other aggressors such as China over Taiwan or Islamist terrorists. And preventing these human rights violations is the best way of achieving justice by ensuring that people equitably receive what they deserve, which is their access to their basic human rights and the prevention of suffering. The opponent makes the argument on the counterplan that we can't simply ignore the Outer Space Treaty, but they ignore my advocacy, which tells you that we just have to amend it to allow for satellites. The opponent then claims that it's still being followed today. No, it's not. There's exploration in satellites right now and talk about mining asteroids. There is appropriation of outer space happening right now, and we're already seeing the benefits. They then claim that the Outer Space Treaty has never been broken before, but that assumes a definition of appropriation that doesn't include satellites and exploration, which isn't completely true. Again, there are so many interpretations, which makes it really hard to enforce. There's not a single universal source that tells us whether or not satellites, asteroid mining, exploration are or are not space exploration, which is why it's not universally agreed on, and I'll elaborate on why this is really important later. Again, it is definitely ambiguous because it doesn't define appropriation, and it was written before things like mega constellation and asteroid mining even existed. There is no way to follow the OST right now without clearing up these ambiguities in the first place. On Ukraine, they say Starlink is targeted. 2 responses here. First, SpaceX already warned Ukrainian civilians of this potential risk, advising them with safe ways to utilize the critical technology. Rocket 22, SpaceX CEO Elon Musk warned yesterday that Starlink user terminals in Ukraine could be targeted by Russia and advised users to take precautions. People in Ukraine should turn Starlink only on when it's needed, place the antenna as far away from people as possible, and place light camouflage over the antenna to avoid visual detection. A thin layer of spray paint could work. Second, Lerman 22 states that the devices have usually been placed in densely populated areas where they could be a lot of civilians anyway. Russian cyber attacks have not ramped up on these systems. They're currently appear to be very busy attacking the websites of small towns and villages. And if you don't buy that, sorry, I said 2 responses. There's actually 3 responses. Third response is that all of the previous hacking Russian attempts have already been prevented by advancements in the satellite technology. There have been software updates, and that is why we don't see these targeted wars right now. On debris, first, March 18 states that SpaceX is combating space debris already by flying the satellites at half the originally planned altitude, orbiting them out of the harm of the majority of existing space debris, and furthermore, this allows for the easy removal of satellites after 5 years in orbit. Second, this argument should actually be counted as my side because private space companies like SpaceX are responsible for cleaning up space debris, reducing their impact. Stefan 21 states that Starlink could help pick up junk that has been left in Earth's orbit and stored in its cargo bay until the rocket returned to Earth. So these 2 arguments go to show that space debris is not an issue. If anything, it is literally being picked up by private companies, and the only chance of solvency that we have at these impacts of space debris are by private companies. So you can cleanly flow this argument to my side, and whatever impacts they read on space debris, it's only being prevented by private companies since governments have no interest in preventing space debris right now. In both worlds, there is going to be debris. It's only a matter of who is actually trying to solve for it right now. With that, let's go into their case. The OST must be amended to allow for the appropriation of orbital slots since it's extremely outdated and it is way too ambiguous. The fact that my opponent and I have different pieces of evidence that say that private appropriation does or doesn't violate the OST and that activities like mining, exploration, or orbital slots are an appropriation goes to show the varying interpretations of the OST. There is not a single true interpretation that must be followed. Therefore, it's impossible to follow the OST and it must be amended or disregarded as a whole. If it were true that activities like satellites went against the OST, the OST, then the FCC wouldn't have given Elon permission to launch tens of thousands of satellites. The counterplan solves for all of the opponent's impacts by ensuring that it's easier to follow and clarify what space activities are allowed and what is not allowed, and this could help to achieve justice. However, with the current state of the OST, there is no way for people to follow it. If you believe that following international law is a good thing, I totally agree. We should follow international law, but we should make it easier to follow, and that is my advocacy. On weighing, you have to prefer empirical impacts because any debater can pull up a huge impact and a huge magnitude. You should vote for the debater who better convinces you that their impacts are more probable. And my impacts are completely empirical because they have already happened. We already see Starlink helping Ukraine right now by improving the drone technology, and that is why they're winning the war right now. That's why the war crimes in Ukraine aren't as bad as they would have been otherwise. Despite possible appropriation of outer space, however, there have been no challenges to private ventures. If their argument about space war was a legitimate concern, then countries would be actually trying to enforce the OST, but in reality, it's kind of already being disregarded, and that is because of the reasons I read above. Again, it is so impossible to follow, and the only way for countries and actors to actually follow this is by amending it and for allowing for the private appropriation of orbital slots in order to continue to provide these benefits to people not only in Ukraine, but internationally. For these reasons and more, I negate.
All right. So next up, I have a 3-minute final affirmative rebuttal. I have 40 seconds of prep time left. Are judges fine if I take that? Yes, okay. My time starts now. So that was time. All right, and now the order is just as a quick off-time roadmap. I'll be going into
Hang on,
the
I think we're
first-
missing it. Yeah, I wanted to make sure all our judges were here. Sorry, go ahead.
No problem. So I'll be going into first, I'll be addressing the negative side of the flow and going over some line by line on that and some voting issues. And then I'll be going into the affirmative side of the flow, and I'll be giving voting issues on that. Is everyone ready to start? Okay. So then let me just set up my doc. 1 sec. Okay. My time starts now. So first, we're going to take a look at the framework debate and see where it currently stands. My first voting issue is framework, because first of all, they talk about how util and negative util is needed to actually follow iLaw, but they ignore my claim that iLaw is actually a direct prerequisite. And this means that in order for it to actually be codified into some sort of form, which I would actually help the world, it has to be a prerequisite argument, and you have to look to the app before the neg. Additionally, they also concede the argument that they don't tell you how to weigh between different types of suffering, so that means that their framework is incomplete. And additionally, they also don't address the argument that they drop my second reason to prefer, which talks about how people actually consent to this, and therefore it's the only way to actually achieve a real world impact. And therefore, Judge, I win on framing, and the debater that will win today's round will be the one who is most consistent with international law and does not want to change it. Now, let's go on to the contention level debate. They talk about how we can't actually follow this, and how about like exploration and mining appropriation has actually broken the OST before. But this is wrong, Judge, because if you extend my observation, which I have at the top of my case, it talks about how there's a distinction between extraction, appropriation, exploration, and all these things. And therefore, Judge, appropriation is under my definition. It still has never been broken before. And I also give Stewart 17 as a card, and they ignore all my reasons why the OST is not it doesn't matter why the OST is outdated, and therefore we still win on the argument that OST should still be followed, especially with Pershing 19 and all of these arguments. Additionally, Judge, let's go on to the second subpoint that they have, the DA that they have. They talk about, well, they concede the argument that the war can happen through Russia and how strongly is increasing targets. And they concede this argument because I don't see them respond to it, which means that this implication is that their argument can actually lead to war. And this links into my case too, because I talk about how violations of ILAW lead to war. And that's Perez 21 and Gallagher 15. And they're just actuating my impacts of war by breaking international law, because Russia is now looking for war, and they concede my cards on that. Now let's go to the affirmative side of the flow, and let's see. Oh yeah, and then now let's go on to the affirmative side of the flow. So they talk about how the OST is not ambiguous, but they concede that ambiguity is a claim to justify loopholes. And my third reason to prefer still stands clearly, which talks about how ILAW is still clear and gives you clear legal precepts to actually guide conduct and influence opinion and decision. And additionally, again, it hasn't been broken before. So my claims against their counterplan of how it's ambiguous and it's outdated still fully stand, and the premises of their counterplan can be disregarded. And that is another voting issue, Judge, that you cannot vote on their counterplan because of the fact that OST is going to be like OST should be followed and it should not be broken. Additionally, Judge, on impacts, extend my Perez 21 and Gallagher 15 card, which talk about how we will lead to space war and nuclear war eventually through these things actually occurring because of the fact that there will be lack of regulation and undermining of international law. And that is why my impacts still stand. My opponents cannot achieve their impacts of helping people through Starlink because, again, this risks nuclear war, which I've already explained, as Russia wants to do this. Therefore, judges, because of these reasons and many more, and because my case win still stands and my opponents doesn't, I strongly urge an affirmative ballot. Thank you.
Great round. Thank you so much
Great.
for judging, everyone. Thank you for your
Great
time.
round. Thank you for judging.
So I'm assuming we're gonna deliberate, enter our votes. The last judge to vote has the decision who will announce, and then I'm gonna give some comments. Everyone else can do what they wish. So that's the plan. Alrighty. All right, we can all come back. We have a decision. All right, congratulations. It's truly an accomplishment to make it this far. For what it's worth, for me, I thought this was an outstanding display of highly skilled technical line-by-line debating. It was a pleasure to judge it. It is, and let me re-reference the decision so I don't screw this up. All right, it is, in fact, a 3-0 decision for the negative. Since I'm already talking, I'll just keep talking. So NAG wins the AF framework of ILAW. I don't think you ever caught up to what the counterplan is. Counterplan is amending, it is fiating the amendment of existing international law so that it can be more clear so people can follow it and adhere to it. That, takes out all of your criticisms of it. Like your suggestion is that it is wrong to violate international law, black and white, and it has to be the law the way it is now. That just doesn't work. Of course, the negative has the opportunity to present an advocacy, and if their advocacy is a change in international law, they can absolutely win under that standard. So for me to vote AF, I'd have to do a lot of things. I'd have to first give a strategic loss to the 2AR on the framework debate. Say AF lost the framework, so now we're going under utilitarianism. And then I would have to fill in some blanks on the Russian war impact. I think that there was potential here. I think a viable 2AR strategy to win the ballot would be to kick out of your own framework, extend util, extend the time frame on Starlink, and go all out for that and say, look, we're using util, we're stopping war, right? And only the AF side can do that. So that could have been a place on the line by line that you could have blown up in the 2AR rebuttal. That would have been a viable pathway to the ballot. But as it was argued here, I'd have to grant strength of link on this scenario more than I'd be comfortable with the way it was argued. But it was definitely not quantified or weighed. And so I'm very much not inclined to kind of do that weighing for you. I mean, I get it's sort of intuitive. Okay, we don't want to stop or create, we don't want to create war. But I'd like for a discussion about the risk of war. How widespread is it? How is that different than what the NAG is saying that they're stopping? Those types of comparisons have got to take place if I'm going to grant the NAG or the AF some offense under the NAG's framework on the negative scenario. So that is what I thought about the round. But again, I thought it was an outstanding display of technical skill in debating the line by line specifically. So thank you for letting me judge and speak.
Thank you so much.
Should I go next? I can go next. All right, this was a really good debate. I enjoyed judging it. You both debated excellently, and you should all feel very accomplished for being in the semis of the TOC. It's a huge achievement. I voted negative because I think the counterplan solves the whole case. There are a lot of things happening in the 2AR, and I'm going to be honest, I don't know why like 90% of them matter for the debate. Because if the counterplan solves the case and it avoids the net benefit, then like none of this stuff matters. So like this framework argument, the counterplan would also stop violations of international law because, like it would ban all of the asteroid mining and appropriate, like whatever appropriation is that the AF bans, the counterplan bans it too. The counterplan doesn't violate, like it doesn't break international law because it clarifies that the thing is legal, which means that it isn't like illegal or anything like that. Like it has all the nations agree that the satellite their DA is about is legal, which means it wouldn't like violate your framework or anything like that. And so it's like, if that's true and you don't have a solvency deficit, then it's like it does the case, except for this one satellite and that one satellite helps like win the war in the Ukraine, which is bad. It's like, if that's true, then like I don't really know why like anything else matters. Like whether or not the OST is ambiguous, whether or not like people have broken it in the past, whether or not people like consent to international law, like these are all things being debated, but they're like totally tertiary issues, because like the counterpoint solves the case. Like there's not, even if I concluded you won all of them, there would not be a reason why it does not demonstrate an opportunity cost to the affirmative. And so it's like, you know, I checked to see if you had a solvency deficit. I didn't think you did. I checked to see if it solved the net benefit. I think it does. I voted neg.
I just wanted to say congratulations to both of you. This was such a joy to watch this debate. You have a couple of other judges who are much more experienced in Lincoln Douglas debate than I am. I'm a parent judge who's looking for flow. I think you know that from my paradigm. And I was so impressed with everything that I saw here. And I just have, in the 3 days of judging, this is the first time I've encountered the Starlink argument, and I think it is just an elegant solution to the resolution. It's so brilliantly presented and was really well done, and I agree. It solves the case, and it's just I was sort of blown away by that. It was really beautiful. So well done on that, and that's it. But great job to both of you.
I actually have one thing to add, because what Nathan just said, I think, is a great demonstration of why, you know, the terms that we use, you know, no link, no solvency, case outweighs. Counterplan solves case. It's the rudimentary tagline of the argument, but we all felt like the visceral power from it, like when it's just true. So use that, right? Use the boilerplate language, especially in a line by line heavy debate, because you want to find that one response that really is the winner. And you know, there's a reason that we came up with these terms in the first place. Is, you know, that makes sense. So okay, that's all I got to say. Great round.
Thank you so much, judges. Great round, opponent.
Judging. Yeah, great round. Good luck on finals.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.